Welcome back to the Garden of Diseases. If you saw my last update, you know that diseases cropped up in my garden, and with our humidity that is very bad news. And on top of it, I was facing 10 days of bad weather according to the weathermen. Well, they were wrong. We had nice sunshine all week long, and it really helped go a long way to get rid of some of this disease. It rained yesterday, and it's trying to rain again today. I looked at the radar, and it looks like a lot of rain is about to hit me. But here's my zucchini. It's getting ready to bloom. And here's the purple hull peas. These are doing very well. I don't see any disease on these. Here's my sugar beets. Yesterday, I pulled one of these up and tasted it. They have a mild sugar taste, but it kind of tastes like a turnip with a mild sugar taste. I'd hoped there would be something that you could just snack on raw, but now it makes sense why nobody throws them and does it that way. So I don't know if the taste would change when they're cooked or not, but they also left an aftertaste in my mouth for about an hour, kind of a saccharine taste. So that's what they taste like, if any of you are curious. Here's my butter beans. It looks like the disease has stopped out here, and they're just going wild. They'll be blooming soon. I'm still having a problem with the green beans. From pictures I've seen on the internet, it looks like this is sun scald. Here's what some of the damage looks like, and I saw this happen the other day. The leaves end up looking kind of water soaked, and then it's like all the cells in them start to collapse, and then it turns white, and which eventually turns to this brownish dried up stuff. And it's odd that if it's sun scald, that it occurs to leaves that are under other leaves. So I'm not sure. And then when I pull these, the branches off that have these leaves on it, they're hollow inside. They just crush under my fingers very easily. So I don't know if it has something to do with the uptake of all the excessive water that's in the soil or what. But hopefully they'll hang in there long enough for me to get some beans off of them. My pickle bush cucumbers are doing very well. They should start blooming any time now. These are nice. They don't sprawl all over the place like your standard cucumbers do. I pulled my onions up, and the largest ones ended up this size, which is pretty good for Virginia because onions just don't grow well here. These were Georgia sweets, and I'm sure they'd grow better in Georgia, but I thought that was pretty good. And the other day I got a box from MHP Gardener, and he sent me one of his puny onions. And would you look at that? He lives in Virginia too. But these are candy onions, and they get very large, as you can see. Look at the difference here. These are day neutrals, and they seem to do well for everybody. I can't remember if these are long day or short day onions, but you really need to grow the proper onions for your area, and it's hard to get those around here. But next year, I surely need to grow some candy onions. Isn't that amazing? I mean, look at the difference here. Same amount of effort. I mean, why not? So thank you, Bobby, for sending the onions. And you sure do need to do a video about onion growing. Now for the garden out back. I started seeing some Japanese beetles, so I hung a trap out here. You're supposed to keep that at least 30 feet away from your garden. And they absolutely do work. There's some beetles in there. I haven't seen many. I think a lot of them probably drowned this year. So here's where my garden is at today. If you haven't seen my other videos, what happened was I was late getting my garden in this year because of all the rain and the fluctuating temperatures. So I came out and I planted the garden late, and the same day that I had tilled it up and I got about a third of it planted, the most brutal storm I've ever seen in my life hit. And it pounded this ground so hard that it pounded what little sand that's in it out of it. I had about a ½ inch of sand on top of the soil. It compacted it so bad that I could walk out here the very next day after tilling it when it was soaking wet, and I didn't even leave a footprint. So I ended up only keeping one row, the one with the peppers and cucumbers and zucchini and squash there, that row next to the fence. And I had to plow it all up and start all over. So the garden is way late this year, and because of that, I decided to crowd the rows closer together and plant more thickly, because in August we have a killing heat that pretty much nothing will survive. So I'm hoping that by being crowded like this, it will shade everything better. but I knew that I would risk disease being close like this because we have a very humid environment. We have a problem with disease even, you know, when you're doing all the right things. But if I'm going to beat the heat, this was my only option. So the odds were against me on this to begin with. So now I have some disease out here, and I caught a good day where I could spray. And that's one of the difficulties with having a lot of rain, is that you aren't able to get out and spray and fight disease. You can't get out and spray and fight the bugs. And weeds take over because you just can't get out there and weed it. So this is my biggest problem in my garden. My pickling cucumbers were hit with downy mildew. So I sprayed them with a fungicide called Daconil. And I have gone through and pulled off all the worst leaves and tried to thin this out so that I'll have no more than a single layer of leaves, so that the next time I spray I could get a thorough coverage. The plants will still produce with downy mildew, but the problem is you end up with risking sun scald on the stems and the cucumbers being exposed like that. So hopefully it'll hang in there long enough so that the new growth up here on the fence will drape down, and hopefully I can get it to cover these stems and the cucumbers. Last year I had the same problem, and they did keep producing. They didn't produce well, but hopefully I will get some cucumbers out of this. Yesterday I put up 3 pints of bread and butter pickles. Those pickles are real good. If you want a good recipe, I have a video on that, and I'll put a link in the description box. These are Israeli melons, and these are the strangest things because I've come out here very often and see water beaded up on these leaves, even though everything else out here is dry. See if you can see that. It's just starting to rain, but that's not from the rain. The water always stays beaded up on those leaves like that. You can compare it to how dry the cucumbers are out here. These leaves are just dry as can be. Look at how the water beads up on those. Here I have slicing cucumbers, and these haven't been hit by the disease yet. I have a couple of cucumbers in there that are just about ready to be picked. My peppers aren't even worth talking about. Here's the green beans out back, and as you can see, they have that same problem. And I think it has to do with the soil staying too wet. Last year when my garden drowned, the green beans were the first to go. Apparently they're just more sensitive to excessive water than the other plants. And last year my butter beans lived all the way through. But these are starting to bloom, so hopefully they'll start producing fast enough so that I'll get something before they die off. The butter beans are doing well. They're getting ready to bloom. I don't see any more disease on these. These purple hull peas are doing well, but one of the problems with having a lot of rain is that with all the cloudy weather, the plants tend to stretch, trying to reach for sunlight. So the plants are kind of stretched. And when it rained yesterday, they kind of fell over. So I came out, pulled all the plants up, pulled some more soil up around the roots, and I put these little stakes and strings up to hopefully give them enough support so that they won't fall again. Because once they get loaded with beans, I'm sure they're going to be so top heavy they'll come over again. So that was my solution on that. And then this row of green beans is just as bad as the rest. These butter beans are doing well. No more disease on those. And this row of purple hull peas isn't doing too well. These were planted about a week behind the other ones, and I have a disease that's starting to crop up here on the tops of the leaves. I'm not so sure what that is, but it's getting like a bronzing on the outer edges of the leaves. And there's quite a bit of that starting up out here. There's another one that's doing it. It started raining again, so I hope I can get this video in before it gets too bad. But the tomatoes are doing well. These are the beefsteak tomatoes. They're looking good. These are Amish paste. They're doing very well. These are opalcas, and I was afraid that I was going to lose these to spotted wilt virus. And They seem to be improving. The tops stay wilted on these, but they seem to be a little less wilted every day. So until I see spots, I'm letting these stay. But as you can see, they don't look so good. But it just could be that they just don't like my climate. These are Super Italian paste tomatoes, and they're doing very well. They seem to be blooming more so than the other paste tomatoes. And I have one here that's really weird. This is supposed to be a Super Italian paste tomato, and look at that growth spurt that that thing went through. And I've been very careful not to over fertilize these plants. When I started these seeds, as soon as I hardened them off, we had just torrential rains constantly hitting day after day. They sat outside and got drowned and was constantly dumping water out of the trays and couldn't add fertilizer because, you know, they were so waterlogged all the time, and they weren't getting any sun. They got leggy and yellow, and they looked half dead when I put them out here. So I only gave the plants a little bit of fertilizer when I planted them. A week later, they didn't seem to be responding a whole lot, so I gave them just a little bit more, and that's all they've had. And look at the growth on this thing. And it turns out it's not a paste tomato at all. There's what the tomatoes look like. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this one, because it looks like it has reverted back to something else. They were purchased seeds. I didn't save these seeds myself. And these are homestead tomatoes. They're right pretty. This one's my favorite plant in the whole garden. Here's some more Israeli melons, and these have just started blooming. And at this point, they're only producing male flowers. I've read that with melons and cucumbers, for the first 10 days to 2 weeks or so, they'll only produce males, and what they're doing is training the bees to come in and pollinate so that they'll be there when the females arrive. The corn has grown a little bit. I've come out here and suckered some of them, but I need to get out here and do some more. If you've never grown corn before, corn will put out suckers. You see that corn there? It looks like a little baby corn plant coming up next to it. That's a sucker, and they always say to pull those off, that they won't produce anything and they just drain energy away from the plant. So they're easy to just pull them off. I did see a study that said that suckering didn't make a difference, but it's just what I'm used to doing, so I guess I'll keep doing it. This is sweet corn. Sweet corn is the type of corn you eat, like corn on the cob, or for cream corn, just for eating on the table. If you want to have corn for cornmeal or for animal feed, what you need to grow is dent corn. It's totally different when it dries. The sweet corn will shrivel up to next to nothing when it's dry, but the kernels of dent corn remain whole. So if you want to grow animal feed or have corn for cornmeal, you need to find some dent corn, and they don't sell it in places like Walmart, or even my feed and seed store doesn't sell it. It's something that you would have to order online. Here's the giant pumpkins. I sprayed these with a fungicide, and that seems to have helped those. Whatever it had was eating away at the edges of the leaves there, and it seems to have stopped it. The sweet potato slips are coming right along. These are pie pumpkins, and these are grown from seed that I saved from a pumpkin that I bought at the grocery store. I grew some last year, and of all the pumpkins I grew, these did the best. And then something ate my pumpkins, so I'll give it another try. The rain is starting to pick up, so I had to get out my umbrella, so I apologize for the noise of the rain hitting that. But here's my zucchini, and there's something interesting here. I saw a video the other day that's put out by Utah State University's Extension Office, and the man said that he prunes his zucchini, and that's something that I'd never thought about doing before. But he said that he prunes his because it makes it easier to see the zucchini once they've grown down there. If you've never grown it before, those things can get as big as your leg, and you still won't see them down there. They just blend into the shadows or something. And he said the other advantages are that it opens the plant up so that it can get more sunlight and air and water in there. You know, these leaves can act like umbrellas and shelter the plant from the rainfall. And another advantage, he said, is that powdery mildew can build up on the leaves over time. And he said by taking out the older leaves, you're reducing your risk of powdery mildew. And It also makes it easier to spot squash bugs down there. And when I came in and pruned these things out, I took a lot of squash bugs out with it. A lot of them, I had squash bug eggs on the leaves, and they had just hatched and were just crawling with these little tiny squash bugs. So I eliminated probably several hundred by coming in here and pruning these things. And another thing was that after I thought about it, you know, they produce the leaves, and the zucchini itself is produced at the end of the trunk. And after a while, you end up with a heck of a lot of leaves down there, and it's only producing at the end. So I'm thinking that probably a lot of the plant's energy is wasted on those older leaves, and that energy would be better put into the production of the zucchini. Mine had produced a good flush of zucchini, and then it had kind of stopped. And since I pruned these the other day, the production is picking up. As you can see, I've trimmed quite a few leaves off of these trunks. And he also says in that video that his branch out. Mine never did. Mine always stayed on a single stalk. And look at that one there is starting to branch out. I believe he said he had 4 branches off of his one plant there. So be sure to look at that video. I also pruned the squash plants, and when I pruned them, I dusted the stalks with some 7 dust. I took some 7 and put it on a paintbrush and just painted the stalks. Was very careful to do it late in the day when the blooms were closed up, and try to keep it all confined to the trunk, because I have a terrible problem here with squash vine borers. I hope you could see this, but I had a squash that something had bored into. There was a worm in the squash. It ate all the way down through that little squash and through the stem of it and into the trunk of the plant. So I cut it off, and I took a wire, and I kept digging around in there until I got that worm out there, and I killed it. Then I brushed this with 7 dust, and this plant has recovered remarkably. I think there was only 3 leaves on it after I had done this, because I cut off anything that was damaged, and all of this growth has come out since I've done that. So if you have a problem with it, maybe just running a wire up through the trunk. You could kill the worm and save your plant that way. It seems to be working with this one. So that's how the gardens are doing today. They're still hanging in there, but they're still at risk because of the rain, and looks like I have a lot of it headed for me. So I hope your gardens are doing better than mine, and I hope it helps.